Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're digging into a really critical global development. It's a fascinating story and, honestly, a pretty controversial one coming out of international trade right now.
Absolutely. We're looking at the alleged resale of rare earth minerals.
Exactly. We want to unpack that, look at the immediate fallout, trace some of these, broader economic dependencies, and think about what it all says about different national development models.
The goal is really to give you a shortcut, help you understand the complex currents shaping global supply chains as we speak.
But hang on, before we jump right in, just a quick word from our partner. We'd like to highlight a really exceptional historical series called A History of China by Hui. It's available over on Amazon. It covers this huge span from ancient times right through the Sui and Tang dynasties. Really detailed insights into China's past. You can grab it as an ebook or in paperback. Definitely worth checking out. Okay, so let's unpack this controversy. The story is that India has allegedly been reselling rare earth minerals that originally came from China.
Right. And the way this apparently surfaced is quite interesting. It seems Beijing got a tip-off from a partner nation in Southeast Asia. That prompted them to launch an investigation.
And what did they find?
Well, according to the sources, authorities found evidence that over 120 tons of rare earth materials not approved for export by China, had been sort of rerouted, ending up going through India.
Wow, 120 tons. That's not insignificant. Maybe we should quickly clarify, for anyone listening, what exactly are rare earths and why are they so important?
Good point. So rare earth elements, there's a group of 17 metals, chemically quite similar, and they're absolutely vital for, well, almost all modern tech. Think smartphones, EV motors, wind turbines, sophisticated defense systems, even things like MRI machines.
Okay, so pretty much everything driving the modern economy.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
Now, they aren't necessarily rare in the ground, geologically speaking, but the process to extract them and refine them into usable metals, that's complex, expensive, and often environmentally challenging.
Which makes controlling the supply chain incredibly strategic, right?
Exactly. And the initial findings here suggest India was taking these Chinese rare earths and allegedly reselling them marked up to Western countries.
Okay. But what's really striking, reading through our sources, is that this doesn't seem like a one-off incident. There's a suggestion of a pattern here.
Yes, that's a key point. It does seem to fit into a broader dynamic we've seen before. For instance, you remember after the Ukraine conflict started in 2022, there were widespread reports that India began reselling Russian oil.
Right, I remember that. And the numbers involved were just staggering.
Absolutely staggering. One source alleged that a single family group made something like $200 billion in just 1 year from that oil resale. I mean, whether that exact number is true or not, the scale was clearly enormous.
And it's not just commodities like oil or rare earths, is it? There was another case mentioned.
Correct. A really interesting one involving a U.S. aerospace company. They thought they were buying titanium screws sourced via suppliers in Italy and India.
Titanium strong, light, expensive, crucial for aerospace.
Exactly. But they discovered later these were actually cheaper aluminum screws, originating from China. The allegation was the Indian intermediary bought them at aluminum prices and then passed them off, sold them as the much pricier titanium.
Wow. That kind of thing must really shake confidence, right, in the whole supply chain.
Oh, definitely. It raises huge questions about trust, about transparency. If you can't be sure where your critical components are really coming from or even what they're really made of, it erodes the whole basis of these complex global trade networks. Companies get wary. Countries get wary.
So given these allegations about the rare earths, how did China react? What was the response?
Well, China's response was pretty direct and quite impactful. They tightened their export controls on rare earths, specifically targeting shipments going to India.
Not just a general tightening, but aimed squarely at India.
Seems so, yes. It looks like a strategic move designed to, well, apply pressure where it would be felt most.
And it certainly seems like it was felt. This move apparently triggered a major crisis in India's auto sector.
That's right. The Confederation of Indian Industry, which is a major voice for Indian business, they put out a pretty stark warning. They said production is, quote, near stalling.
Near stalling? That sounds serious.
It is. Market analysts, General Barrio was cited. They're estimating delays now of maybe 2 to 6 months for many popular car models within India.
2 to 6 months wait time. Ouch.
And on top of that, you're looking at price hikes. Maybe 5 to 8% increases for consumers. And this is tied directly, analysts say, to these Chinese restrictions on rare earths.
So, real-world impact. Longer waits, higher prices. That's going to hit consumers and manufacturers hard.
Absolutely. It's a massive headache all around.
And how are India's big car companies reacting?
Well, they're understandably putting pressure on their own government. India's major auto groups have apparently urged the Modi administration to lean on Xi Jinping to try and get these rare earth exports restored.
Interesting. So they believe India has enough diplomatic leverage to make that happen, just demand they turn the taps back on.
It seems to reflect that belief, yes. Which is interesting when you look at India's position. I mean, India is a huge car producer, let's be clear. In 2024, it's the world's fourth largest, produced about 4.84 million vehicles.
Fourth largest. Okay. Who's ahead?
Well, China is way out in front, something like 31 million. Then the U.S. at around 10.5 million, and Japan just over 8 million. So India's number 4 spot is significant.
But here's the catch, right? The dependency issue.
Exactly. Despite that volume, the report suggests that essentially all Indian car models rely heavily on parts made in China. Not just the high-tech stuff using rare earths, but components across the entire vehicle.
So that raises a really critical question. If China decided to restrict all auto parts exports to India, not just rare earths, could India's entire car production just grind to a halt?
It's a scary thought, but based on these reports of dependency, it seems like a very real vulnerability, a massive one.
And the auto sector is just one piece of this puzzle, isn't it? This dependency runs deeper.
Oh, much deeper. Just looking at 2024 figures, India imported something like $7 billion worth of EV batteries and magnets alone from China.
$7 billion. Just for batteries and magnets, that's huge.
It really highlights the scale.
Yeah.
And it goes way beyond cars. Think laptops, solar panels, antibiotics, lithium batteries. For over 80% of these imports, India relies on China.
80%? That's critical infrastructure, essential goods.
It is. And the Deccan Herald, a major Indian newspaper, pointed out it also includes things like penicillin, machinery, textiles, hardware, even stuff like basic stationery.
Some might dismiss stationery or textiles as, low tech.
Right, and some Indian media might frame it that way.
Right.
But the sources we looked at emphasize that producing even seemingly simple things efficiently and at scale involves complex supply chains, specialized materials, processing capabilities.
Things that are heavily concentrated in places like China. It's not just about assembling the final product.
Precisely. And the overall trade numbers really drive this home. In 2024, bilateral trade between India and China hit about $138.4 billion.
Okay, big number. But what's the balance?
That's the key. India is running a trade deficit with China of over $100 billion within that total.
Over $100 billion deficit. Wow. That kind of imbalance year after year, it does make you question the long-term sustainability, doesn't it?
It certainly raises that question very pointedly. How sustainable is that level of dependency?
Which brings us neatly to India's push for Atmanirbhar Bharat's self-reliance. Now, on paper, India has a potential advantage. It holds the world's third largest reserves of rare earth minerals.
That's true. They do have significant reserves sitting in the ground.
But the big but is the refining capability, right? They don't really have the capacity to process these ores into the usable metals that industry needs.
Exactly. That's the paradox. Having the raw material is one thing, turning it into a high-purity, usable product efficiently is another challenge entirely. And what's fascinating here is why it's such a challenge. China has spent decades optimizing its refining processes, driving down costs.
So if India were to build its own refining plants now,
the cost would be dramatically higher. Some estimates suggest potentially dozens of times higher than sourcing from China. From a purely economic perspective, that makes domestic refining currently unfeasible, or at least extremely uncompetitive.
And it's not like other countries haven't tried to crack this nut.
No, absolutely not. Our sources highlight that even advanced economies, the US, Germany, Japan, they've been struggling for, over 15 or 16 years to build up significant non-Chinese rare earth refining capacity.
16 years and still struggling. That really underlines the scale of the challenge. It's not just about money, it's technology, expertise, environmental issues.
It's all of those things. It's incredibly complex, requires huge investment, and involves handling some pretty nasty chemicals and byproducts. It's not a simple fix.
Okay, so India's caught in a bit of a bind. What's the path forward being discussed there?
Well, you're seeing Indian outlets urging the government to do two things, really.
Yeah.
One, try to get China to cooperate and ease the current restrictions in the short term. But two, and more strategically, develop plans to genuinely reduce this long-term dependence.
And there are plans for investment.
Yes. India is talking about investing somewhere between 35 and 50 billion rupees into building domestic rare earth manufacturing capabilities.
That sounds like a substantial amount, 35 to 50 billion rupees.
It does. But interestingly, the analysts cited in our sources seem pretty skeptical about whether this will succeed, at least in the near term.
Skeptical. Why? What's the reasoning behind that doubt?
Well, one perspective offered in the sources is quite provocative. It suggests that India's political system itself, specifically, its early adoption of democracy, as they put it, has actually made large-scale coordinated national economic planning more complicated.
That is provocative. How does that connect to something like rare earth refining or reducing dependency?
The argument connects back to incidents like those alleged Russian oil resales we mentioned earlier. The perspective presented is that while huge profits were generated, that money reportedly flowed mainly to powerful private interests like specific families, rather than being systematically channeled back into, say, national development funds or state-led industrial projects.
Ah, okay, so contrasting that with other economic models.
Exactly. The comparison drawn is with systems where the state plays a more direct role in capturing profits from strategic sectors, maybe like China used export subsidies funded by state-directed profits to build up its manufacturing base over time. In those models, there are mechanisms, arguably, to deliberately redirect capital towards long-term industrial goals.
Whereas in India's case, according to this view, those mechanisms might be weaker. The link between generating national wealth and reinvesting it strategically into building domestic industrial capacity might be less direct.
That seems to be the core of the argument presented. Without that strong state-driven push to reinvest profits into building up, say, competitive low-end or mid-tier manufacturing, the kind you need as a foundation for more complex things like rare earth processing, it becomes much harder to achieve genuine self-reliance or significantly reduce import dependency across the board.
So it's not just about finding the money, but about the system's ability to direct that capital effectively towards long-term strategic industrial development, rather than it dispersing primarily into private hands.
That's the crux of this particular analysis, yes. It frames it as a systemic challenge for India in achieving its self-reliance ambitions, especially in complex, capital-intensive sectors like this.
Right. So zooming back out this whole trade dispute over rare earths, it really does throw a spotlight on just how fragile and interconnected global supply chains are.
Absolutely. And it highlights the immense strategic importance of resources like rare earths in today's world. A single pinch point can have ripples across major global industries.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it, how seemingly specific trade actions can expose these deep economic vulnerabilities and dependencies that exist between nations.
Definitely. And this one incident, it really illuminates more than just a trade spat. It touches on those deep economic ties, the vulnerabilities, and, as we just discussed, the really complex interplay between geopolitical strategy and a country's domestic economic policy and even its political structure.
Well, we hope this deep dive has given you, our listeners, a clearer picture of these India-China trade dynamics, from the immediate crisis in the auto sector to some of those deeper systemic questions at play.
And it leaves us with a question perhaps for you to think about. In this incredibly interconnected world we live in, how do different national economic systems, different political structures, actually shape a country's ability to build resilience and achieve self-reliance in these absolutely critical industries? What are the inherent trade-offs involved?
Definitely something to mull over. And before we go, just one last reminder to check out A History of China by Hui, available now on Amazon in ebook and paperback. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, stay informed.